When my wife and I signed the divorce papers, I didn't cry. The tears came 3 weeks later, while looking at a brochure for an Alaskan cruise we had planned to take for our 65th birthday. I was sitting at my kitchen table, the one we bought together 12 years ago at an estate sale, sorting through mail that had piled up during the chaos of separating our lives. Bills, advertisements, catalogs, and then this glossy brochure with glaciers and whales, and the promise of adventure in our golden years. We'd requested it 6 months before everything fell apart, back when we still had a we and a future that stretched out in front of us like a well-lit highway. I held that brochure in my hands and something inside me cracked open. Not anger, not bitterness, not even sadness about Jennifer specifically, but grief for something else entirely. Grief for the life we planned so carefully, mapped out in such detail, discussed over countless dinners and walks and quiet Sunday mornings. That life was gone. It had never really existed except in our imaginations, but somehow its loss felt as real as if it had been taken from me by force. The divorce itself had been remarkably civil. No screaming matches, no fights over possessions, no lawyers circling like sharks. Jennifer and I had simply looked at each other one evening after 26 years of marriage and acknowledged what we'd both been feeling for longer than either of us wanted to admit. We'd grown apart. Not dramatically, not because of any single betrayal or failure, but gradually, like two paths that start parallel and slowly diverge until you look up one day and realize you can barely see the other person anymore. "I don't think we make each other happy," Jennifer had said. She wasn't crying. Neither was I. We were sitting in our living room, the television muted, having the conversation we'd been avoiding for years. "No," I'd agreed. "I don't think we do. I don't hate you, David. I hope you know that. I just don't think we should keep pretending this is working." And she was right. God help me, she was absolutely right. We'd become roommates who occasionally had dinner together. Two people sharing space but not lives, going through the motions of a marriage that had lost its substance somewhere along the way. The love was still there in a fashion, but it was more like fondness for someone you used to know well. The passion, the connection, the sense of being essential to each other, all of that had faded so slowly we barely noticed it happening. So we agreed to divorce. We divided our assets fairly. We were both professionals with our own incomes, our own retirement accounts, no children to complicate things. Jennifer moved into a condo downtown. I kept the house, though it felt enormous and empty now, full of rooms I didn't need and silence I didn't know how to fill. Everyone told me how well I was handling it. My colleagues at the accounting firm where I'd worked for 23 years said I seemed remarkably calm, remarkably adjusted. My brother called from Seattle and said he was proud of how mature I was being about the whole thing. Even Jennifer, in one of our final conversations before she moved out, said, "You're taking this so well, David. Better than I expected." But they were wrong. I wasn't taking it well. I was just numb. Completely, thoroughly numb. I went to work, I came home, I made dinner for one. I watched television without really seeing it. I went to bed. Day after day, the same routine, the same emptiness, the same sense of moving through a world that had lost its color and texture and meaning. Until that brochure. Until that moment when the future we'd planned came crashing into my present and made me understand what I'd actually lost. We were supposed to retire at 65, both of us. Jennifer had it all calculated, the exact date when our retirement accounts would be sufficient, when we could step away from our careers and into the life we've been working toward for decades. We were going to travel. 6 months of the year we'd stay in our house, which we planned to downsize to something easier to maintain. The other 6 months we'd explore. Alaska in the summer, New Zealand in their summer, Europe in the spring, South America in the fall. We had detailed itineraries we'd been building for years. We had a shared document on our computer with all the places we wanted to see, ranked by priority, with notes about optimal seasons and estimated costs. We were going to take up hobbies. Jennifer wanted to learn to paint. I wanted to finally learn to play the guitar, something I've been saying I'd do since my 20s but never had time for. We were going to volunteer together, maybe with Habitat for Humanity or a literacy program. We were going to be one of those couples you see in retirement community advertisements, silver-haired and smiling, hiking in scenic locations, holding hands on beaches, living proof that the best years were still ahead. That was the plan. 26 years of marriage, and we'd spent probably a quarter of that time planning our retirement. It was our shared project, our vision of the future, the thing that kept us going through difficult work weeks and stressful periods. Just wait until we retire, we'd say to each other. Just wait until we have time to really live. Except now there was no we. There was just me, 50 years old, sitting alone at my kitchen table, staring at a brochure for a cruise I'd never take, mourning the future that had died with my marriage. I didn't cry often. I'm not someone who cries easily. But that day I wept. Deep, wrenching sobs that seemed to come from somewhere primal and unfamiliar. I cried for the Alaska trip we'd never take. I cried for the small house we'd never downsize to. I cried for the painting classes Jennifer would take with someone else or alone, or maybe not at all. I cried for the guitar sitting in its case in the basement, something I'd bought 3 years ago for retirement and never even tuned. I cried for all the plans we'd made and all the conversations we'd had and all the dreaming we'd done together about a life that would never exist. The grief was disorienting because it wasn't grief for what I'd had. It was grief for what I'd expected to have. And I didn't know how to process that. How do you mourn something that never existed? How do you grieve for a future that was always just imagination and hope? I called my brother that night. Mark had been through a divorce 10 years earlier, nasty and complicated, nothing like mine. But he'd survived it, remarried, seemed happy now. If anyone could help me make sense of what I was feeling, maybe it was him. It's normal, he said after I tried to explain. You're not crazy. You're grieving. It doesn't matter that it was amicable. You still lost something. But I didn't lose Jennifer, I said. Not really. We'd already lost each other years ago. We just finally admitted it. What I'm grieving is all the stuff we planned to do. All the retirement dreams we had. Is that stupid? To be this torn up about a bunch of plans. It's not stupid, Mark said. Those plans were real to you. They were your roadmap for the second half of your life. And now that roadmap is gone and you don't have a new one yet. That's terrifying and sad and completely understandable. So what do? I asked. You grieve, he said simply. You let yourself feel it. And then eventually, when you're ready, you draw a new map. But I wasn't ready. Not even close. The weeks after the brochure incident were dark. I went to work because I had to. Because bills don't stop and responsibilities don't disappear just because you're having an existential crisis. But I felt like I was operating on autopilot, going through motions without any real engagement or presence. At night, I'd wander through my house, through all the rooms that Jennifer and I had filled with our life together. And everywhere I looked, I saw ghosts of our planned future. The den where we were going to set up Jennifer's art studio. The basement where I was going to finally build the workshop I'd always wanted. The backyard where we talked about putting in a garden, growing our own vegetables in retirement because we'd finally have time to tend them. I had packed away all the photos of us. I thought it would help, but it was a random object found in the back of a drawer that would break me in two. I was looking for a screwdriver, something simple, just needed to tighten a loose handle on a kitchen cabinet. And in the back of the junk drawer, behind the tape and scissors and batteries, I found a small notebook. I pulled it out, curious, and opened it to find Jennifer's handwriting. Lists. Pages and pages of lists. Italy trip, Rome, 3 days. Florence, 4 days. Venice, 3 days. Amalfi Coast, 5 days. Books to read in retirement. All of Tolstoy, all of Dickens, complete Shakespeare. Volunteer opportunities. Animal shelter, library, hospital, school. Skills to learn, painting, Jennifer, guitar, David, cooking, both, photography, both, Italian, both. I sat on the kitchen floor with that notebook, and I couldn't breathe. This was our life, the one we planned in such detail. Jennifer had kept lists of everything, organized and thorough, and I'd love that about her. We'd spend evenings adding to these lists, refining them, getting excited about all the things we were going to do once we had time. Once we retired. Once we finally got to live instead of just working and existing. But we were never going to do these things. At least not together. Maybe Jennifer would still go to Italy, but without me. Maybe she'd learn to paint, but I wouldn't be there to see her first finished canvas. Maybe she'd volunteer at an animal shelter, but I wouldn't hear her stories about it over dinner. And me? Would I still learn guitar? Would I ever make it to New Zealand? Or would I just keep working and coming home to this empty house until I was too old to do anything else? The thought terrified me. I was 50 years old. Statistically, if I was healthy, I had maybe 30 good years left. 30 years to figure out what to do with the second half of my life, now that all my plans for it had evaporated. But how? How do you reinvent yourself at 50? How do you create a new vision for the future when you've spent decades building one that's now obsolete? I started avoiding certain things. Places that reminded me of our planning sessions. The coffee shop where we used to go on Sunday mornings, spreading out travel brochures and retirement planning books. The hiking trail where we'd walk and talk about the countries we wanted to visit. The bookstore where we'd browse the travel section, buying guidebooks for trips we hadn't scheduled yet but knew we'd take eventually. I avoided conversations about the future too. When colleagues talked about their retirement plans, I changed the subject or excused myself. When my brother asked what I was going to do with my life now, I'd give vague answers and redirect the questions about him. I couldn't think about the future without feeling that crushing weight of loss, so I just stopped thinking about it entirely. But living in a perpetual present with no future to work toward is its own kind of death. I felt like I was just marking time, days bleeding into each other with no purpose or direction. Work became just something to fill the hours. Home became just a place to sleep. Nothing meant anything because nothing was leading anywhere. 3 months after the divorce was finalized, Jennifer called. We hadn't spoken much since she'd moved out, just occasional text about mail that arrived at the house or logistical details we needed to settle. But this was an actual call, her voice in my ear, familiar and strange at the same time. "David," she said. "How are you?" "I'm fine," I lied. "You?" "Okay. Listen, I wanted to tell you something before you heard it from someone else. I'm seeing someone." The words hit me harder than I expected. Not because I wanted Jennifer back. I didn't. We'd made the right decision, I knew that. but because it meant she was moving forward, building a new future, while I was still frozen in place. That's good, I managed. I'm happy for you. Are you? She asked, and I heard genuine concern in her voice. David, I worry about you. You sound, I don't know, lost. I'm fine, I repeated, more firmly this time. Are you seeing anyone? Dating at all? No. Not ready for that. Are you doing anything? The things we talked about, the hobbies, the travel, anything. I didn't answer. David, she said gently, you can't just stop living because our plans changed. You still have a whole life ahead of you. You need to figure out what you want it to look like. I know, I said, but I didn't know. I had no idea. After we hung up, I thought about what she'd said. Jennifer was moving on. She'd met someone, probably someone who made her happy in ways I hadn't in years. She was building a new future, one that had nothing to do with me or our old plans. And that was healthy. That was what you were supposed to do after a divorce. Let go of the old vision and create a new one. But I couldn't seem to do it. Every time I tried to imagine my future, all I saw was the blank space where our plans used to be. I couldn't picture myself traveling alone. I couldn't imagine learning new skills just for myself, with no one to share the experience. I couldn't envision volunteering or taking classes or doing any of the things we'd planned, because they'd all been part of a couple's vision, a shared life, and I didn't know how to translate them into a solo existence. I was stuck. Completely, utterly stuck. And I didn't know how to get unstuck. My brother suggested therapy. You need to talk to someone professional, he said. This isn't something you can just push through on your own. I resisted at first. I'd never been to therapy, never thought I needed it. I was a practical person, someone who solved problems with logic and planning. But this wasn't a problem I could solve that way. This was grief and loss and confusion all tangled together, and I had no roadmap for navigating it. So I made an appointment with a therapist, a woman in her 60s named Dr. Patricia Morrison. I sat in her comfortable office, surrounded by books and plants and soft lighting, and tried to explain what I was feeling. I don't miss my wife, I told her. I miss her sometimes, but not in a I want her back way. More in a I miss the familiar way. What I really miss, what I can't stop grieving, is all the plans we made. All the things we were going to do. The whole vision of retirement we'd built together. Does that make sense? Perfect sense, she said. You're experiencing what we call ambiguous loss. You're mourning something that existed in potential rather than in actuality. And that's actually harder to process than mourning something concrete because there's no body to bury, so to speak. No clear ending. So how do I process it? I asked. How do I stop feeling like my future died with my marriage? You start by acknowledging that your future as you imagined it did die. And that's a real loss that deserves to be grieved. But then you recognize that your future itself didn't die. Just that particular version of it. You still have a future, David. It just looks different than you expected. And your task now is to imagine what that future might be. But I can't, I said, and I heard the desperation in my own voice. Every time I try to think about it, I just see emptiness. Or I see the old plans, but with me alone in them, and that feels pathetic. Why does it feel pathetic? Because we designed those plans for two people. For a couple. Traveling alone, learning hobbies alone. It all feels like consolation prizes. Like I'm doing a worse version of what we were supposed to do together. Dr. Morrison leaned forward. David, can I challenge that assumption? What if the plans you made with Jennifer weren't actually the perfect plans for you? What if they were compromises, things that suited both of you, but maybe weren't exactly what either of you truly wanted? I started to protest, but she held up her hand. Think about it. Really think. Of all the places you planned to travel, which ones were your choices and which were Jennifer's? Of all the hobbies you planned to take up, which ones genuinely excited you versus which ones you agreed to because they were important to her? I sat with her question, and slowly, reluctantly, I started to see what she meant. The Italy trip had been Jennifer's idea. I'd always been more interested in Japan, but Jennifer didn't like the idea of such a long flight or such a different culture. The painting classes were for her. I'd added guitar to balance it, but honestly, I'd never been that passionate about music. The small house we planned to downsize to was in the city because Jennifer wanted to be walking distance from galleries and restaurants, but I'd always preferred the suburbs, the quiet, the space. Our plans had been compromises. Good compromises, made with love and mutual respect, but compromises nonetheless. They weren't a perfect reflection of what I wanted. They were a negotiated settlement between two people's different preferences. So what do I actually want? I asked Dr. Morrison. If I'm not just following the plan Jennifer and I made, what do I want my future to look like? I don't know, she said. But I think that's the question you need to spend time with. Not, what can I salvage from my old plans, but what do I truly want for the second half of my life? That question haunted me for weeks. What did I want? It should have been simple to answer, but it wasn't. I'd spent so many years thinking in terms of we, negotiating and compromising and planning with someone else's needs in mind, that I'd lost track of my own desires. Or maybe I'd never really known them in the first place. I started keeping a journal, something Dr. Morrison had suggested. Every night before bed, I'd write about my day, about what had made me happy or interested or engaged, even in small ways. And slowly, patterns started to emerge. I like being outdoors more than I'd admitted. Most of our travel plans had been city-focused because Jennifer loved museums and restaurants, but the moments I'd enjoyed most in our marriage were the hiking trips, the camping weekends, the times we'd been in nature. I liked working with my hands. I'd always dismissed this as just basic home maintenance, but I actually enjoyed fixing things, building things, the satisfaction of making something work or creating something useful. I liked quiet more than stimulation. Jennifer had always wanted to go, do, see, experience, and I'd gone along with it. But my happiest moments were often the quiet ones, reading or working in the yard, or just sitting with a cup of coffee watching the birds. These weren't grand revelations. They weren't exotic desires or unusual passions, but they were mine. And recognizing them felt like the first step toward drawing that new map Dr. Morrison had talked about. I decided to start small, to try things without committing to a whole new life plan, just to see what resonated. I went on a solo hiking trip, something I'd never done before. Just a weekend in a nearby state park, a tent and a backpack and miles of trails. I was nervous about being alone, about having too much time to think, about facing the silence I'd been avoiding. But something unexpected happened out there among the trees. The silence wasn't oppressive. It was peaceful. And being alone wasn't lonely. It was clarifying. I hiked for hours each day, nothing but my thoughts and the rhythm of walking and the beauty of the natural world around me. And slowly, gradually, I started to feel something shift inside me. I started to feel possibility. Not plans yet, not concrete ideas, but a sense that maybe there was a future worth having, even if it looked nothing like the one I'd lost. Maybe there were things I could discover about myself at 50 that I'd never known. Maybe there were experiences I could have alone that would be meaningful and fulfilling. Maybe the second half of my life didn't have to be a pale shadow of what I planned with Jennifer. Maybe it could be something entirely different, something uniquely mine. On the last night of that trip, I sat by my campfire and thought about the question Dr. Morrison had asked. What did I truly want? And for the first time, I tried to answer it without reference to anyone else's preferences or expectations. I wanted to spend more time in nature. I wanted to learn practical skills, woodworking maybe, or wilderness survival. I wanted to travel, but not the kind of travel we planned, rushing from city to city, checking off landmarks. I wanted slow travel, staying in places long enough to really know them, hiking their trails, meeting local people, understanding their rhythms. I wanted a life that was quieter, simpler, more grounded in the physical world than the plans Jennifer and I had made. These desires surprised me. They didn't fit the image of retirement I've been carrying around for years. But they felt true in a way those old plans never quite had. When I got home from that trip, I did something I've been avoiding for months. I went down to the basement and found all the retirement planning materials Jennifer and I had accumulated. The brochures, the lists, the carefully organized folders with information about different travel destinations and retirement communities and activity programs. I looked through all of it one last time, acknowledging what it represented, the years of hope and planning and dreaming. And then I threw it all away. Not in anger, not in bitterness, but in acceptance. That life was gone. Those plans belonged to a marriage that no longer existed. And holding on to them was keeping me stuck, keeping me from imagining something new. The act of throwing away those materials was both devastating and liberating. I cried again, grieving all over again for the future that would never be. But underneath the grief was something else. Relief, maybe. Or permission. Permission to let go, to start over, to create something different. I started making changes. Small ones at first. I signed up for a woodworking class at a community college. It met Saturday mornings, and I'd always had Saturday mornings free. Used to spend them with Jennifer drinking coffee and planning our week. Now I spent them in a workshop, learning how to use chisels and saws, making mistakes and slowly getting better, creating simple objects with my own hands. I joined a hiking group, mostly people my age or older, all of them looking for community and exercise and excuses to be outside. We hiked every Sunday, different trails each week, and afterward we'd get lunch at some local diner and talk about everything and nothing. I made friends, something I realized I hadn't really done in years. Jennifer and I had couple friends, people we socialized with together, but these were my friends, people who knew me as an individual rather than as half of a pair. I changed my financial plans too. Jennifer and I had been saving aggressively for retirement, living below our means to build those accounts that would fund our traveling lifestyle. But now, without a specific vision for retirement, I didn't need to save quite so aggressively. I could actually use some of that money now in my 50s, while I was still healthy and energetic. So I loosened my budget a little. Not recklessly, I was still an accountant at heart, but enough to give myself permission to spend money on experiences and equipment and classes without guilt. I bought good hiking boots, really good ones, the kind I would have balked at before because they seemed like an extravagance. I took a week-long wilderness skills course in Montana, learning how to navigate by compass and start fires without matches and identify edible plants. I drove to national parks within a day's distance, spending long weekend hiking and camping and photographing the landscapes. And slowly, month by month, I started to build a new vision of my future. Not a complete vision, not a detailed plan like I'd had with Jennifer, but a direction, a sense of what mattered to me and what I wanted to spend my time on. I realized I didn't actually want to retire at 65. The early retirement we'd planned had been Jennifer's idea, driven by her eagerness to start the next chapter. But I actually liked my work, found meaning in it, wasn't in a rush to leave it behind. So I adjusted my financial planning to reflect that. Maybe I'd retire at 70, or maybe I'd just gradually reduce my hours, transitioning into semi-retirement rather than stopping abruptly. I realized I didn't want to downsize into a small house in the city. I liked having space. I liked having a yard and a garage and a basement workshop. And I liked the suburbs, the quiet neighborhoods, the slower pace. So I stopped looking at smaller homes and started thinking about how to make my current house work for just me, how to repurpose rooms for my new interests and hobbies. I realized I didn't want to travel 6 months of the year, constantly on the move. That had been Jennifer's dream, not mine. I wanted roots, routines, a home base. But I also wanted adventures, trips that were purposeful rather than just checking destinations off a list. Maybe I'd spend a month hiking sections of the Appalachian Trail. Maybe I'd take a wilderness guide course in Alaska. Maybe I'd volunteer with a conservation organization in another country for a few weeks. Focused trips with clear purposes, not just tourism. 6 months after that first hiking trip, I was in Dr. Morrison's office for what would turn out to be one of our last sessions. I've been seeing her weekly, then bi-weekly, working through the grief and slowly building towards something new. "You seem different," she observed. "Lighter somehow." "I feel different," I said. "I still have moments of sadness, moments when I miss the old plans. But they're less frequent now. And they don't knock me down the way they used to." What changed? I stopped trying to salvage the old future and started building a new one. Not a perfect one, not a complete one, but one that's actually mine. That fits who I am rather than who I was as part of a couple. That's significant work, David. You should be proud of yourself. I am, I said and realized I meant it. I'm proud of myself for letting go, for not staying stuck, for being brave enough to imagine something different. But letting go wasn't a one-time event. It was a process, something I had to keep doing over and over as new triggers appeared and old grief resurfaced in unexpected moments. A year after the divorce, I ran into Jennifer and her new partner at a restaurant. I was there with my hiking group celebrating someone's birthday, and suddenly there she was, looking happy and relaxed in a way I hadn't seen in years. Her partner was younger than us, maybe mid-40s, energetic and warm. They were looking at a map spread out on their table, planning something, and I felt a sharp stab of the old pain. That should have been me. We should have been the ones planning trips together, looking at maps, getting excited about adventures. For a moment, I was right back where I'd been a year ago, grieving the lost future, feeling the weight of all those abandoned plans. But then something interesting happened. I looked at Jennifer more closely, at the way she was animated and engaged, and I realized something. She was happier now than she'd been with me. Not because I'd been terrible or she'd been terrible, but because we'd been wrong for each other, or at least we'd become wrong for each other over time. And the future we'd planned, the one I'd been mourning so deeply, might not have been as wonderful as I'd imagined. It might have been just okay, just comfortable, just two people going through motions together without real passion or connection. Maybe losing that future wasn't the tragedy I'd thought it was. Maybe it was an opportunity, a chance to find something that fit better, felt more authentic, meant more. I didn't go over to Jennifer's table. I didn't interrupt her evening. But I caught her eye across the restaurant, and we smiled at each other, a real smile of mutual good wishes, and I felt something release inside me. Another layer of grief peeling away, another step toward acceptance. That night, I added a new entry to my journal. Saw Jennifer today with her new partner. She looked happy, and I realized I'm happy for her. Not in a magnanimous, martyring way, but genuinely. Because we both deserved better than what we had together. We both deserved futures that fit us, even if that meant those futures couldn't include each other. And I'm building mine. Slowly, imperfectly, but authentically. And that matters more than any perfect plan ever could. The second year after the divorce brought more changes, more growth, more letting go of the old and embracing of the new. I completed my woodworking class and started building furniture. Simple pieces at first, but gradually more complex. I made a bookshelf for my living room, a bench for my backyard, a small table for my workshop. I wasn't trying to become a professional woodworker or turn it into a side business. I was just doing it because I enjoyed it, because creating something with my hands gave me a sense of accomplishment and peace that I've been missing. I took more trips, solo adventures that I planned according to my own interests and pace. I hiked the John Muir Trail in California over 3 weeks, carrying everything I needed on my back, sleeping under stars, pushing my body in ways I hadn't in years. I took a wilderness photography course in Yellowstone, learning to capture the beauty I was seeing, creating art rather than just consuming experiences. I volunteered with a trail maintenance organization, spending a week in Colorado clearing paths and building water bars, contributing something useful rather than just taking. Each of these experiences taught me something new about myself. I learned that I was stronger than I'd thought, both physically and emotionally. I learned that I actually enjoyed solitude, that being alone with my thoughts wasn't something to fear but something to savor. I learned that I didn't need a partner to validate my experiences or make them meaningful. They were meaningful because they mattered to me, because they aligned with my values and interests and desires. I also started dating, though cautiously and without any agenda. I wasn't looking for someone to recreate the future I'd lost with Jennifer. I was just open to meeting people, to seeing what kind of connections might develop. I went on dates with women I met through the hiking group or woodworking class or just online. Some were pleasant but forgettable. Some were awkward disasters. A few led to second and third dates, brief relationships that ran their course and ended amicably. And through all of it, I was learning what I wanted in a partner, if I wanted one at all. I learned that I needed someone who valued independence as much as connection, who had their own interests and didn't expect to do everything together. I learned that I was attracted to competence and curiosity on more than conventional beauty or social grace. I learned that I didn't want to compromise on the big things anymore, didn't want to negotiate my dreams into something safer or more acceptable to someone else. If I met someone who fit, great. If I didn't, that was okay too. I was building a life that worked for me as a single person. Any partner would need to enhance that life rather than replace it or diminish it. 2 years after the divorce, on what would have been my 28th wedding anniversary, I did something symbolic. I went through my house and removed the last traces of the future Jennifer and I had planned. The fancy espresso machine we'd bought for lazy retirement mornings. The set of luggage we'd purchased specifically for our anticipated travels. The books about Italy and France and all the places we were going to visit together. I didn't throw them away. That felt too harsh, too bitter. But I donated them, let them go, made space for new things that reflected my actual life rather than my abandoned plans. And then I did something else. I got out a large sheet of paper and some colored pens, and I started drawing my own map. Not a detailed plan like Jennifer and I had made, with specific timelines and itineraries and financial projections, but a looser vision, more like a treasure map than a route plan. I drew symbols for the things that mattered to me now. Trees for time and nature. Tools for woodworking and building. Mountains for adventure and challenge. Books for learning and growth. A simple house for home and stability. Stick figures for friendships and community. And in the center of the map, I wrote a single word: authenticity. That was my North Star now. Not comfort, not security, not impressing others or meeting expectations. Just authenticity. Building a life that was genuinely mine, that reflected who I actually was rather than who I thought I should be. I hung that map in my home office, where I could see it every day. A reminder that I was navigating by new coordinates now. That the old route was gone, but I was finding my way nonetheless. My brother visited that spring, coming from Seattle for a long weekend. He walked through my house, saw the woodworking projects I completed, the hiking gear organized in the garage, the photos from my trips on the walls. And he said something that stuck with me. "You've really done it, haven't you? You've built a new life." "I'm working on it," I said. "Still figuring things out." "No, I mean it. 2 years ago, when you first called me after finding that cruise brochure, you sounded lost. Devastated. Like you'd never find your way again. But look at you now. You're thriving." "I don't know about thriving," I said, "but I'm okay. Better than okay most days." "That's thriving," Mark said. "After what you went through, after losing not just your marriage but your whole vision of the future, to get to better than okay is a huge accomplishment. Don't minimize it." He was right, I realized. I've been so focused on the process, on the daily work of grieving and rebuilding and reimagining, that I hadn't stopped to recognize how far I'd come. 2 years ago, I couldn't imagine a future worth having. Now I was living one. Not a perfect future, not the one I'd planned, but a good one. Maybe even a great one in its own unexpected way. That summer, I took the most significant trip yet. A month-long journey to Japan, the place I'd always wanted to visit but had never gone, because it didn't fit into Jennifer's and my joint travel plans. I went alone, with just a backpack and a loose itinerary, ready to be open to whatever I found there. Japan was everything I'd hoped and more. The temples and gardens spoke to something deep in me, appreciation for simplicity and mindfulness that I hadn't fully recognized before. The hiking trails through mountains and forests fulfilled my need for nature and challenge. The craftsmanship I saw everywhere, in woodworking and ceramics and textiles, inspired me to take my own making more seriously. And the culture of solitude, the way people could be alone in public spaces without it being seen as sad or strange, validated my own journey toward being comfortable with my own company. One evening in Kyoto, I was sitting in a small restaurant eating dinner alone, watching people pass by on a street outside, and I had a moment of profound clarity. This was exactly where I was supposed to be. Not supposed to be in some cosmic, predetermined sense, but supposed to be because I'd chosen it, because it aligned with who I actually was, because it felt right in a way that all those meticulously planned trips with Jennifer never quite had. I wasn't lonely. I wasn't wishing someone else was there to share it with me. I was complete, just as I was in that moment, in that place. The grief I'd carried for so long, the heavy weight of mourning a future that would never exist, had transformed into something else entirely. Not happiness exactly, not some constant state of joy, but contentment, satisfaction, a sense of being aligned with my own life rather than constantly fighting against what it had become. I pulled out my phone and wrote an email to Dr. Morrison, even though I hadn't seen her in months. I think I've finally let go, I wrote, not just of Jennifer or the marriage, but of the future we planned. I'm in Japan right now, a trip we never would have taken together, doing things in ways we never would have done them, and I'm genuinely happy. Not happy in spite of being alone, but happy because I'm alone, because this is my trip designed for my interests at my pace. I think I've finally stopped mourning what I lost and started celebrating what I found. Thank you for helping me get here. She responded the next day. David, what you've accomplished is remarkable. You've done one of the hardest things a person can do. You've let go of a future you'd invested decades in imagining, grieved it properly, and then had the courage to imagine something entirely new. That takes tremendous strength and flexibility. I'm proud of you, and I hope you're proud of yourself too. I was proud. Standing in that restaurant in Kyoto, halfway around the world from everything familiar, I felt proud of the person I'd become through this process. Someone who could sit with grief without being destroyed by it. Someone who could let go of plans without feeling like a failure. Someone who could reimagine a life at 50 and then have the courage to actually live it. The rest of that trip unfolded like a gift I was giving myself. I hiked portions of the Kumano Kodo, an ancient pilgrimage trail through the mountains. I took a woodworking class in Takayama, learning Japanese joinery techniques that didn't use any nails or screws. I spent days just walking through neighborhoods in Tokyo, observing people's daily lives, finding beauty in the ordinary. I ate alone in restaurants, read books in parks, took trains to small towns I'd never heard of just to see what I'd find there. And through all of it, I felt a sense of rightness, of alignment, of being exactly where I needed to be doing exactly what I needed to do. This was my life now. Not the life I'd planned, not the life I'd spent 26 years building toward with someone else, but my life nonetheless. And it was good. When I returned home, I felt different. More solid somehow, more grounded in who I was and what I wanted. The house that had felt so empty and haunting 2 years ago now felt like a sanctuary, a base camp for the life I was building. I looked at the rooms differently now, seeing not ghosts of abandoned plans, but spaces full of possibility. I converted the den that was supposed to be Jennifer's art studio into my woodworking design space, filling it with books and sketches and samples of different woods. I turned the guest bedroom into a proper photography darkroom, deciding to learn film photography as a way to deepen my connection with the wilderness images I've been capturing. I made the backyard into a native plant garden, something that would attract birds and butterflies and require minimal maintenance but provide maximum peace. Each of these changes was a small act of claiming my space, of making this house reflect who I actually was rather than who I'd planned to be with someone else. And each one felt like healing, like another layer of old grief being replaced with new growth. I also deepened my friendships, investing in the community I'd been building over the past 2 years. The hiking group had become more than just people I walked with on Sundays. They were genuine friends now. People I called when I needed to talk, people who called me when they needed support. We celebrated birthdays and holidays together. We helped each other with projects. We showed up for each other in ways that felt meaningful and sustaining. One of these friends, a woman named Carol who was 53 and had been widowed 5 years earlier, became particularly close. We'd often stay after group hikes to talk, finding that we shared similar perspectives on grief and rebuilding and the strange journey of reconstructing a life in middle age. "You know what I've learned?" she said to me one afternoon as we sat by a lake after a long hike. "Grief doesn't end. It just changes shape. I still miss my husband sometimes, still have moments when I can't believe he's gone. But it doesn't consume me anymore. It's just part of my landscape now, part of who I am." "That's exactly it," I agreed. "I still have moments when I think about the future Jennifer and I planned, still feel that pang of loss. But it's not the crushing weight it used to be. It's just a sadness I can hold alongside everything else, all the new things I'm building and experiencing." "Do you think you'll ever stop grieving it completely?" she asked. I thought about her question. I don't know. Maybe not completely. But I think that's okay. Those plans were real to me. They mattered. They shaped years of my life. It would be strange if I could just forget them entirely. I think the goal isn't to stop grieving. It's to make room for the grief to coexist with other things, with joy and purpose and new dreams. Carol nodded. "That's wise. And you're doing it. You're making room." I was. Slowly, imperfectly, but genuinely. I was making room for both the past and the present, for both the loss and the growth, for both the grief and the joy. 3 years after the divorce, I reached another milestone. I turned 53, which was significant because it was the age Jennifer's father had been when he died suddenly of a heart attack. Throughout our marriage that had hung over us, this awareness that life was uncertain, that we needed to have plans and be prepared and make sure we lived our dreams before it was too late. It had been part of what drove our detailed retirement planning, this urgency to make sure we did everything we wanted while we still could. But turning 53 as a single man with a completely different life than I'd imagined, I felt that urgency differently. Not as anxiety about time running out, but as motivation to make sure I was actually living rather than just planning to live. Jennifer and I had spent so much time planning for someday, for retirement, for when we'd finally have time to really live. But I was living now. Taking trips now, learning skills now, building relationships now. Not waiting for some perfect future moment, but making this moment, this day, this life meaningful. I celebrated my birthday with my hiking group, taking them on a challenging trail I'd scouted earlier in the year. We summited a small mountain, ate lunch at the top, laughed and told stories, and enjoyed the achievement of getting there together. And that evening, alone in my house, I wrote in my journal about how different this birthday felt from the ones I'd spent with Jennifer when we'd been celebrating, but also counting down, always aware of how many years until retirement, how many years until we could start really living. "I'm not counting down anymore," I wrote. "I'm not waiting for someday. This is my life right now, and it's good. Not perfect, not what I planned, but good, real, mine. And that's enough." Around this time, I also made a decision that felt significant. I started seeing someone, a woman named Patricia, who I'd met through my woodworking class. She was 51, divorced for 7 years, with grown children and her own interesting life. We'd been friends for months before either of us acknowledged there might be something more there. Our first real date was a hiking trip, naturally. We drove to a state park 2 hours away, hiked for most of the day, set up separate tents at the campground, and stayed up late talking by the fire. It was easy and comfortable, and completely different from the dating I'd done in my 20s and 30s, back before Jennifer. There was no game playing, no trying to impress, just two middle-aged people who'd both been through difficult things and come out the other side, seeing if they enjoyed each other's company. We did, very much. But neither of us was in a hurry. Neither of us needed to rush towards some predetermined relationship milestone or start planning a shared future. We were both content to let things unfold naturally, to enjoy each other's company without trying to force it into some specific shape. "I like that you have your own life," Patricia said to me a few months into our relationship. "I like that you're not looking for someone to complete you or fill some void. You're whole on your own, and that makes being with you feel like a choice rather than a need." "I feel the same about you," I said. "For the first time in my life, I'm in a relationship because I want to be, not because I think I'm supposed to be, or because I'm afraid of being alone." That feels really important. It was important. It was maybe the most important thing I'd learned through this whole journey. That I could be happy alone, that I didn't need a partner to have a meaningful life, and that any relationship I chose to be in should enhance my life rather than define it. Patricia and I continued to see each other, but we also continued to maintain our separate lives. She had her own house, her own friends, her own interests. I had mine. We'd spend weekends together sometimes, go on trips together, share dinners and hikes and conversations. But we also spent plenty of time apart, pursuing our individual interests, maintaining our independence. It wasn't the kind of relationship Jennifer and I had built, where we tried to merge our lives completely, where we'd made all our plans together and expected to do everything as a unit. This was something different, something that honored both connection and autonomy. And it felt sustainable in a way my marriage never quite had. 4 years after the divorce, I got a call from Jennifer. We'd maintained friendly contact over the years, occasional texts or emails, but we hadn't talked on the phone in a long time. When I saw her name on my screen, my first thought was worry. Was something wrong? Was she okay? "David," she said when I answered, "I hope I'm not bothering you. I just wanted to tell you something." "Of course. What is it?" "I'm getting married. To Robert, the man I've been seeing. And I wanted you to hear it from me." I felt a complex wave of emotions. Happiness for her. A small, fading twinge of the old grief. Relief that we'd both moved on. And something else, something like gratitude. "That's wonderful, Jennifer. Congratulations. I'm really happy for you." "Are you?" she asked, and I heard uncertainty in her voice. "I wasn't sure how you'd feel about it." "I'm genuinely happy for you," I said, and I meant it. "You deserve to be happy. We both do. And it sounds like you've found that." "I have," she said. "Robert is wonderful. He's so different from us, from what we were. He's spontaneous and adventurous, and he pushes me to try new things. It's good for me." "That sounds perfect for you," I said. And then, because it felt important to say, I added, "Jennifer, I want to thank you." "Thank me? For what?" "For having the courage to end our marriage." I know I didn't see it that way at the time. I was hurt and angry and lost. But you were right. We weren't making each other happy anymore. And if you hadn't had the courage to say that out loud, we might still be together. Both of us just going through the motions, missing out on the lives we were meant to have. So thank you for setting us both free. There was a long silence, and then I heard her crying softly. "Thank you for saying that, David. I've carried so much guilt about ending things, about disrupting all our plans. But you're right. We both needed to be free to find what actually fit us. And it sounds like you've done that." "I have," I said. "It took a while, and it was harder than I ever imagined, but I have. I built a life I actually love, not just a life that looks good on paper. And I hope you have too." "I have," she said. "I really have." After we hung up, I sat with the conversation for a long time. 4 years ago, the news of Jennifer getting remarried would have destroyed me. It would have felt like final proof that the future we'd planned was completely dead, that I'd lost not just her, but everything we'd built together. But now it just felt like what it was: two people who'd once been married, who'd once shared dreams, moving on with their separate lives. It was sad in a gentle way, acknowledging the ending of something that had once meant everything. But it was also good, this evidence that we were both okay, both building new futures that fit us better than our shared one ever had. I called Patricia and told her about the conversation. "How do you feel?" she asked. "Okay," I said. "Actually, more than okay. I feel like this is the final confirmation that I've really let go, that I'm not holding on to that old future anymore, not even secretly or unconsciously. Jennifer's moving on with her life, and I'm genuinely happy for her. And I'm happy with my own life. That feels like healing. Like the grief has finally transformed into something else." "Into what?" Patricia asked. "Into acceptance, I think. And maybe even gratitude. Gratitude that I got to have this experience of losing everything I'd planned and discovering that I could still build something meaningful. It's taught me things about myself I never would have learned otherwise. About resilience and flexibility and what actually matters to me. I wouldn't have chosen it, but I'm grateful for what it taught me." That conversation with Patricia crystallized something I'd been feeling but hadn't quite articulated. The grief I'd carried for so long had transformed. It hadn't disappeared, probably never would completely, but it had changed from something heavy and suffocating into something almost like wisdom. The experience of mourning a future that never existed, of having to completely reimagine my life at 50, it taught me things I could never have learned any other way. It taught me that plans are just plans, not guarantees. That life doesn't owe us the futures we imagine. That flexibility and adaptability are more valuable than certainty. That we're capable of surviving things we think will destroy us. That endings, even painful ones, create space for new beginnings. That we can reinvent ourselves at any age if we're willing to do the difficult work of letting go and starting fresh. 5 years after the divorce, I reached what felt like a new equilibrium. Not an ending point, because I knew life would keep changing and I'd keep adapting, but a place of stability and contentment that felt sustainable. My life looked nothing like what I'd planned with Jennifer. I wasn't retired, wasn't traveling 6 months of the year, wasn't living in a small city house with an art studio and a carefully curated life of cultural enrichment. Instead, I was still working, but at a pace that felt manageable, with plans to gradually reduce my hours over the next decade rather than retiring abruptly. I was living in my same suburban house, but I transformed it into a space that reflected my actual interests and values. I was taking trips, but they were focused adventures in nature rather than whirlwind city tours. I had a community of friends who shared my interests, I had a relationship with Patricia that honored both connection and independence. I had hobbies that engaged me, skills I was developing, purposes that got me up in the morning. It was a good life. Different than I'd imagined, but good. Maybe even better than what I'd planned, because it was authentically mine rather than a compromise between two people's different desires. One Saturday morning, I was in my workshop building a cabinet when I had a visitor. My neighbor's teenage son, a kid named Marcus who I'd seen around but never really talked to, knocked on my open garage door. "Mr. Thomas," he said tentatively, "can I ask you something?" "Of course, come in. And call me David." He came into the workshop, looking around at the projects in various stages of completion, the tools organized on the walls, the sawdust on the floor. "This is cool," he said. "Did you build all this stuff?" "I did. Took me a few years to learn how, but yeah, these are all mine." "That's awesome. I was wondering, could you maybe teach me how to do woodworking? My parents are getting divorced and my dad moved out, and I don't know, I need something to do with my hands. Something that makes sense when everything else doesn't." I looked at this kid, maybe 17, going through his own version of loss and confusion and grief for a future that was changing. And I remember being in his shoes, though I'd been 50 instead of 17. I remembered feeling lost and purposeless and desperately needing something concrete to hold on to. "I'd be happy to teach you," I said. "When do you want to start?" "Now," he asked hopefully. "Now works," I said. And I showed him the basics, how to hold the tools safely, how to read the grain of the wood, how to measure twice and cut once. We worked together for a couple of hours, and I saw some of the tension leave his shoulders as he focused on the physical task, the concrete problem solving, the satisfaction of creating something. When he left, thanking me profusely and asking if he could come back the next Saturday, I felt something unexpected. Purpose. Not the kind of grand purpose that comes from big life plans or career achievements, but the small, profound purpose that comes from helping another person navigate a difficult time. From sharing what I'd learned, what I'd survived, what I'd built from the ruins of my own losses. I thought about the past 5 years, about the journey from that moment with the cruise brochure to this moment in my workshop, about how far I'd come, how much I'd changed, how completely I'd rebuilt my understanding of what made life meaningful. I'd spent 26 years of my marriage planning for a future that never happened. I'd spent months after the divorce grieving that future, mourning it like a death, feeling like my life was over because the roadmap I'd been following had been torn up. But now, 5 years later, I understood something I couldn't have understood back then. The future I'd lost wasn't the only possible good future. It was just one option, one path, one version of what a meaningful life might look like. And losing it, as painful as that had been, had forced me to discover other possibilities, other paths, other versions of myself that I never would have found if I'd stayed on that original trajectory. I'd learned that there's no such thing as the perfect plan, no single right way to live the second half of life. There are just choices made day by day that either align with who we actually are or don't. And when we're brave enough to let go of plans that no longer serve us, even plans we've invested decades in building, we create space for something more authentic to emerge. The second half of my life wasn't what I'd meticulously planned, but it was mine, genuinely and completely mine, in a way that those old plans never quite had been. And that made it precious, made it meaningful, made it worth every moment of grief and confusion and rebuilding I'd gone through to get here. That evening, I updated my journal with a reflection on the day. Taught Marcus some basic woodworking today, I wrote. He's going through his parents' divorce, looking for something solid to hold on to. I remember that feeling so well. 5 years ago, I was that kid in a 50-year-old body, desperately looking for something to make sense when my whole world was falling apart. And now I'm the person who can offer that stability to someone else, who can share what I've learned, who can say from experience that it gets better, that you can rebuild, that losing the future you planned isn't the end of the world. It's just the end of that particular map. And there are so many other maps you can draw, so many other destinations you can choose, so many other versions of a meaningful life you can build. You just have to be brave enough to pick up the pen and start drawing. I closed the journal and looked around my workshop, this space I'd created in what was supposed to have been Jennifer's art studio. This space that represented everything I'd learned about letting go and starting over and building something new from the pieces of what was lost. And I felt at peace. Not the peace of having arrived at some final destination, but the peace of being okay with the journey, with the uncertainty, with the fact that life rarely goes according to plan, and that's not actually a tragedy. It's just life, messy and unpredictable, and full of losses and gains and unexpected turns. The map I was drawing now, the vision I held for my future, was different than the one I'd held 5 years ago. It was less detailed, more flexible, more open into possibility. It had room for surprises, for changes of direction, for new desires and interests I hadn't discovered yet. It wasn't trying to control every variable or eliminate all uncertainty. It was just pointing me toward the things that mattered most: authenticity, connection, growth, contribution, presence. That was enough. That was more than enough. That was everything. When my wife and I signed the divorce papers, I didn't cry. The tears came 3 weeks later, while looking at a brochure for an Alaskan cruise we had planned to take for our 65th birthday. But 5 years after that, I wasn't crying anymore. I was building, creating, living, drawing a new map for the second half of my life, one that honored both what I'd lost and what I'd found, both the grief that had broken me open and the growth that had filled the spaces where the old dreams used to be. And that map, imperfect and incomplete and subject to revision as it was leading me somewhere good, somewhere real, somewhere worth going, even if I hadn't known this destination existed when I started the journey. Somewhere home.